Hi, everyone. So if you go to the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County, just put that in your Google and you'll get there. It has a section that says education. In the drop-down menu, it's Advanced Learning Institute. If you click on that, you'll get not only all the upcoming classes, but there's also a place where you can click on recordings. And under recordings are the classes that I've taught so far on Job with the slides that I've been using. So if you have any trouble finding it, scream. We'll be able to help you. Somebody asked me last week the source of the Robert Alter quote. Do you remember who that was? So I have the source now, but I don't know if the person who was looking for it is even on. But I'll tell you, and then I'll have this thing called notes now. It's not chat anymore. So it's Robert Alter. It's an essay called Truth and Poetry in the Book of Job. And it is in Harold Bloom's book that he edited called The Book of Job. Chelsea House Publishers. Okay, so let's see, how do I do this? Let's see if I can figure out how to do this because I don't know notes that well. Can people see it? Oh, here it comes. I think here it comes. I don't know.
You should do chat. You should just still. I have
chat. Is there? Oh, there is chat. Okay, the last Zoom I was on only had notes. It didn't have chat, but here we'll put it in the chat, and then you can all, if you're interested, there it is. Okay. So, just to catch everybody up quickly.
Get more sound. I can hear it.
Oh, you want it? Okay? You want me to have the hearing? Okay.
To mute, please, or I'll mute you there. So we've gone through the beginning and the middle and most of the book of Job fairly quickly in 3 weeks. Remember that Hasatan, who is the prosecuting angel, challenges God because God says, look at my faithful servant. He's so faithful to me. He loves me so much. And Hasatan says, yeah, that's because you've given him wealth and the perfect number of children. And you know, his life is great. Why wouldn't he love you? Take that away from him and see what happens. He'll curse you to his face, to your. But he actually, even though everything's taken away from Job, his children, his wealth, his health, still, Job does not curse God. He gets pretty close. He curses the day he was born, and he's very, very angry because he's demanding justice. Like, I did nothing to deserve this. I demand that God come and explain God's self. And then his friends, I put that in quotes, come to comfort him. And all they can tell him is, if you're suffering, you must have done something wrong. No one's perfect, et cetera, et cetera. And they get more and more annoyed as he keeps saying, I am not guilty. I did nothing wrong. No. And that really irritates them because they really want to believe in the reward and punishment theology. So the prologue, where he was doing really well and Hasatan challenges God, it's a prologue written in prose. Then there's a huge number of 30 plus chapters that are written in poetry, which is Job demanding justice, his friends saying, you must have done something wrong. And finally, out of the whirlwind comes God, who basically says, I'm great. I've done all these incredible things. You're just a puny little person. Why don't you just, not have the nerve to question me? Some people find the speeches from God beautiful because it gives you this sort of expanse of the universe, that God has so many things to worry about. However, we do know from the prologue, which, as I mentioned, was written separately from the poetry, we do know why Job is suffering. And it is not because he did anything wrong, it's because God made a bet. And the whole poem, even though it was not written at the same time as the prologue, you have to read it together. And so you're kind of going, gee, this is interesting. God came out of the whirlwind, didn't say anything about justice, or certainly not the kind of justice that we care about in our lives. God just said, look at all the great things I've done, which Job seems to have already known. And then Job says, okay, I'll shut up. And we've seen different interpretations of what that means. Either he's like satisfied with the mystery of God and the mystery of creation, and so therefore I have nothing more to say, or he's trying to show God up for God being the bully that God is in this story. Okay, now we're going to read the epilogue, which is the very end of the book, one chapter. And we believe that the prologue and the epilogue were once one story, and the poetry was written separately, and then someone said, let's put it all together. And let's see what that will do to our understanding of what's being taught. Before we go to that, I just want to see if anyone has any questions or comments, something that was unclear last week, something that you thought about in the meantime. No? Okay, well, yeah, Jane.
Why isn't the whole story about God making a deal with Satan another person's explanation about why bad things happen to good people? That's a story. It's
Right.
something made up. Why isn't that also an explanation? Somebody trying to explain why people suffer, because God makes deals with Satan.
Yeah. Well, the friends are the ones who represent the reward and
Okay.
punishment.
We'll
theology.
talk later. Sorry.
That's okay. I mean, let's see what you think after we read the epilogue,
you.
okay? And let's just take a look at it. And yeah. All right, who would like to read? Jane.
Come on. Okay.
That's what you
All
get
right.
for asking too many questions. No, I'm not. I'm just kidding.
I'll read it. I'd be delighted. After God had spoken these words to Job, God said to Eliphaz the Temanite, "My wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now, therefore, take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering. And my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer not to deal with you according to your folly, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has done." So Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamite went and did what God had told them, and God accepted Job's prayer.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What is God saying here? Anybody?
Well, God's accusing the 3 friends of misrepresenting him.
Yeah, so I mean, the 3 friends have spent all of these different poetic chapters railing against Job and telling him, look, you must have done something wrong, blah, blah, blah. And now, and God, when God came out of the whirlwind and could do his own commentary on this, never said, yeah, these guys are saying the wrong thing. God just said, I'm powerful and strong and you're not. But now, here is God saying, no, he did not get punished because he did bad things. And what these guys, these so-called friends, have said is absolutely untrue. And then Job is able to pray for them so God doesn't punish them for pushing the reward and punishment idea, right? God was going to punish them for that. So Job has to intercede and say, please don't, just the way Moses has interceded many times to save the Israelite people. So this is how the book keeps throwing things upside down. Like, at the beginning, okay, there's a bet that's made. Okay, that's pretty strange. Then you get this reward and punishment theology. Then you get this like God is the great mystery and God's justice is the great mystery. And now God is saying something really different. Like, yeah, reward and punishment is not where it's at. And these guys spoke ill of me. So now you need to go make some sacrifices, which is where we found Job at the very beginning, right? Job would make sacrifices in case his kids had thought something wrong. Okay. Okay, next, please, Jane. Oh, wait a minute, it didn't move. Sorry. There we go. You're muted.
And God restored the fortunes of Jacob when he had prayed for his friends.
Job.
Fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends. And God gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then there came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before, and they ate bread with him in his house. They showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that God had brought upon him. And each of them gave him a piece of money and a gold ring. And God blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He named the first Jeremiah, the second Keziah, and the third Karin Hapush. I don't know how to pronounce this.
Hapuch means reverse. And it's Jemima, not Jeremiah, but okay.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah.
all right, thank you. So, all right. Now Job is being rewarded for saying reward and punishment is bunk because this is not what happened to me. So just when you thought you kind of got an idea of what the theology of this book is, it gets thrown up, hapuch, gets thrown around. Rhea. I see your hand is up, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I was just switching
Yeah.
to different things. I think this ruins the story. And obviously, whoever put it against it was not in the same literature sense that the author of Job is. The big question is, God creates both good and evil. He created, he's created, I should say, but God created everything, including Satan. And so the big dilemma for humans is, what do we do with evil? How do
Right.
we deal with this? And so this epilogue erases the great question. So I wish they didn't put it in.
Yeah, and we have a little bit more to go, but yes, I agree with you. Now, interestingly, the question of when things bad happen, what do we do? And I do think that it gives you a suggestion right here, because I went into studying the book of Job for quite a bit of time, and I wanted to know why bad things happen to good people. And of course, there is no answer. But I discovered that the solution is, when bad things happen to good people, what do you do? And you can see right here that his brothers and sisters and various other people came, they broke bread with him, they showed him sympathy and comfort him. Nobody's saying, you must have done something wrong, you bad person. They're there to comfort him. And that's what we can do when there is a tragedy in life. We are able to offer a shoulder to cry on, an arm to put around someone. In fact, many times it's better not to say anything. And as a matter of fact, when you go to a house of mourning in the Jewish tradition, you're not actually supposed to say anything until the person that you're comforting begins. And certainly don't throw bromides like, oh, God doesn't give you more than you can take and all of that stuff. That does not help. Sylvia.
Well, I guess hold on.
Okay, she's go in the other room. Well, while she's doing that, I just want to point out that now he's getting 7 sons. 7 sons is always, so Sylvia, I'll get back to you in a sec. 7 sons is like the perfect number, right? 7 days the world was created, all that good stuff. And he gets some daughters, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And he gets all his fortune back, and I assume his health. They don't mention it explicitly, but okay, Sylvia, are you available to say something? Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. I'm under Donna. We're in
Okay.
the same room, so it's complicated. So I thought that I like that explanation about they became, all of a sudden, all of his friends became like all of his friends.
Yeah, real
When
friends.
Before that, they weren't. They were
Right.
saying, you must be doing something bad. So my question is this a true expression of who they are, that now they're just wonderful people? Not that there aren't wonderful people in the world, there are, but are they like more, it's like the old Billie Holiday song, nobody loves you when you're down and out, and when you get the dollars back, they're all over you, right?
Uh-huh. Well, they seem to be comforting him before he gets all his money and everything back. Again, we know that this was not written by the same person or people who wrote most of the rest of the book. But the idea here is somehow, oh, you're right, God gave twice as much as he had before. That comes before they come and visit him, but the details are afterwards. Did they change? I think Job has changed, which we're going to spend some time on. Maybe they changed too as a result of this whole experience. Again, written separately, but edited together, so we have to contend with what it means, right? Jane.
I just need to say one thing. I need to point out he doesn't get his children back. He gets new
Yes.
children. They're all
Right.
dead.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I was going to mention that as well. It's great to get 7 new boys, but yeah, the first 7 are still dead. And no one seems to worry about Mrs. Job, because she's been through all this stuff with her husband, and no one seems to care. Okay, Marcia?
Yeah, I'm curious, Suzanne, in the commentaries, because this is not a book I've studied in depth. What is the time span from prologue to epilogue? Is it a year? Is it
Oh.
5 years?
It's never specified.
Yeah, I think that's really important to actually dig deep into to understand, and again, because my question is where were his brothers and sisters the minute that the shit hit the fan? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think that's problematic too. I don't, I mean, you can just extract this paragraph from the book and say, this is what I, as a rabbi, would say we learn from this. One is that when tragedy befalls you, it is that, or when you, not a tragedy, but when you lose the job of your dreams, or your husband left you for another person, you may find better love on the other side that will make you twice as happy, or a job that will fulfill you twice as much that you would have never looked for if, in fact, you weren't. If this thing hadn't sort of pushed you out of the room, so to speak, and and of course you have your family and your friends who will come and support you, allow them to do that. If this is the only thing that's there, then you can learn from this. But otherwise, as Ria said, it makes this whole thing a farce, almost more, I mean, as farcical as the Book of Esther or
Okay,
something else.
let me
It's very
say
upsetting.
a couple of things. First of all, I think that's excellent. Pulling that lesson out of there is, this is what we can really do for each other, and whatever transformation Job went through and the friends went through. And yes, it does make it farcical. This is a book that some consider to be somewhat humorous or ironic or whatever. We'll take a quick look at that in a minute. I think also, as I said last time, this is a very anti-dogmatic book. So every time you think you've nailed it, oh yeah, it's reward and punishment. No, it isn't. Oh yes, it is, right? So you can't really, latch on to that. So it's a complicated book, and we don't know what the time span is, and they don't even know exactly when this was written. I gave a range last time. Anyway, Carol.
Yeah, I just have a question. It seems really odd to me that everybody's bringing him money and a gold ring. Are they like paying tribute to him for being back in God's favor? I mean, that's just a weird part of this whole.
Yeah, it is very weird. I can't answer that.
No, I just wanted to throw that out there. 'cause
No,
that
that's a
struck
good
me
point.
as odd.
Yeah, it's not clear. I mean, clearly this guy was a pretty prominent member of the community. So I don't really know. I mean, I'll see if I can find any answers to that. I offhand don't have any idea why they're doing that. But I now also want you to take a look at the 3 daughters, because naming people is very important in the Bible. Okay, now the 7 sons are never named, the first 7 that died and these, but the women are named, and he named them, and that's very important and significant, and they all mean something. Now Jemima, it's not entirely clear.
Well,
Something it means dove, and some people
oh.
think it means bright as the day. So
yeah, I was going to say that it's Yamima, which is days,
right.
and the feminine of days, meaning it's sort of like, I would have read it if I didn't know. I would have said Yamima is sort of like, it's Yamim. It's
Yes,
all the time, basically.
you're right. You're right.
Femininity
Yeah,
of all the time.
yeah. This is a Christian, way of understanding Hebrew.
And then Keziah. I don't know what Kaz is, but God is in that name.
Okay, Keziah means spice. It could be
Okay.
cinnamon, so it's something, some kind of smell. And Karen Hapuch is supposedly blue eyeshadow. So these are very sensually sort of directed names, which I think might hint at some change in Job, okay, which we will get to momentarily. We have just a little bit more to read. Jane, you want to read the last few verses?
Sure. And in all the land there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance along with their brothers. After this, Job lived 140 years and saw his children and his children's children 4 generations, and Job died old and full of days.
Right. So, oh, Rhea, go ahead. No, you're muted.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I
Go
just was
ahead,
putting,
go ahead, go ahead.
I am so appalled at this epilogue. It destroys the significance of the beautiful book of Job.
Yeah.
We have evil, we have horrors occur in this world, and we're in the middle of horrors of horrors. And the great dilemma, God, the essence of good, the essence of rule and law that we establish, um, and um, and God is responsible. God is responsible for everything. And how do we deal with this? We don't deal with it by creating a little story, what do you call it, a fairy tale. Are you kidding me? Uh, this deserves nothing. You see, I have real strong feelings about
That's
this
great. I
epilogue.
think that's great. That's wonderful.
And so then it takes us away from the real important study that we need to do of the how do we deal with evil in the world. This is the big question, and when we read the epilogue it takes us away from it.
Okay, so
Anyway,
I'm glad.
I won't say anything else, but I had to say this.
No, I'm
I
very
feel the
happy
same
that
way,
you're,
actually.
I'm very happy you're saying this, because when you get upset with something in the Bible, which I have certainly had my share of, it forces you to grapple with it and to figure out what is really going on. We're going to talk a little more about that in a second, but I want to ask you. So first of all, this book purports to answer the question of why people suffer who are innocent. Does it answer it?
No, but the real question is, why do we have evil in the world? God created everything.
Right.
So why did God create evil?
Right.
And so, this is a huge dilemma.
Right.
And because we want to picture God bringing good,
Right.
God bringing the rule of the rabbis created how we live with each other in relationship to God. And so here we have this terrible story, and it's God's fault.
And
God, yeah, go ahead,
I was gonna say, and
Marcia.
and what Ree's saying is like the God that we just prayed to for 10 days, pouring our hearts out, would not do this.
Okay, let's just remember that this was not written by God. This was written by human beings who are trying to grapple with the reality of evil, like the Unatana Tokef, who shall live and who shall die as a result of our actions. That's a prayer we've been saying during this period. And, again, well, oh yeah, some people are going to die of this or that or the other in the next year. And why? Some of them might be young. A child is going to die. Why? This book is supposed to answer that question on some level, but it only answers it for one solitary person, which is Job. There's no other example. of somebody suffering, excuse me, just because God made some sort of a bet. All right, Jane.
Ray is stuck on the epilogue. I'm stuck on the prologue. And the book does answer that. The reason that some people suffer is that we have a God who apparently likes to toy with us and likes to play with us and make little bets and play games and just to see how we react. I mean, that's really, I've always loved this book. I mean, I love chapter 38, but I'm increasingly troubled by this notion of, it's like the Greek gods where they sort of toy with human beings. That's terrible.
No, it is absolutely terrible. And by the way, God does not cop to that in the whirlwind speech, right? God doesn't say, you're suffering because I made this bet. All God says is, I'm a big mystery to everybody, and I'm just incredibly powerful. And it's not that God toys with people. God toyed with this one guy to prove that it was possible to love God for no reward. And once he's proven that to one guy about one guy, he doesn't need to do it with anyone else. So it doesn't explain anybody else's suffering.
Well,
Sylvia,
yeah.
Sylvia had her, if she's made it to the other part of the room.
I'm right here.
There you are. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sitting with Donna right now. This, that whole thing about, who this God is, who's gonna toy with us and, make bets and stuff like that. This speaks to who wrote this book.
Yes.
Yes, because
Yes.
That's right.
to me, it's like, it's taken so much out of Greek mythology and what those gods were doing, which had nothing to do with whether we were good or bad, really. It was whether they were good.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. Good. Marcia, did you want to?
Yeah, I guess I sort of wanted to reinforce that also, I'm really just thinking sort of historically in Jewish theology through the ages. you know Job is such an extreme person. He's uber wealthy, uber happy. Most of us, everybody, that he's in that 1%, that we talk about in our politics, right? He just had it all. And so the question is, like, there are other books in Torah that really, particularly the Psalms, that we do rely on, I think, to get our comfort about the fact that life can be very hard, and not because we have a mischievous God who got pushed a little bit by an evil force. I mean, I'm more interested to know how this book actually works in conversation with other parts of our Tanakh.
Excellent point. And I think that's part of this, is that you have a Torah that is pretty much based on reward and punishment. And then you have this book that says, that's nothing to do with it. And they're in conversation with each other. They're in conflict. And that should get you to think more about all of these questions. And we're not going to have the definitive answers because we're not God. Sylvia, did you have something else you want to say, or is that just from before? Okay, we got a lot of muting going on here. Just shake your head if you aren't, or nod. Okay, they can't figure out how to unmute.
Sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
did have a comment, and it's a little bit different because I happen to have been a Job's daughter for 8 years. I just wanted to put in the perspective of what the story of Job has done in, actually, the Masonic community. They see fate. To me, my lesson that I got was the important thing is faith.
Mhm.
And the important thing is, if you submit completely to what God has done in your life, or then maybe you will get a reward. And even if you don't, you still need to be faithful.
Okay, good. So I want to also point out here that the daughters get an inheritance. That is also very unusual, because this is theoretically happening before the Torah. The Torah does allow for women to get an inheritance if there are no sons, but they have to stay within the tribe so the property doesn't leave the tribe. Anyway, this is another significant thing. So we're going to just look at these questions. What does God mean when he say, you have not spoken of me the thing that is right? God is referring here to the friends.
Yeah, they were slandering Job, and they were lying about him.
And also that you have not spoken of me, God.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, that's true. They slandered Job, but also what about me, God? What was wrong about what they said about God? Well, they said that God operates according to this particular kind of justice. And God has actually proven that they were right, because Job is getting rewarded here. And
Yeah.
God is saying, you're wrong about the theology that you've pushed, but actually, ironically, that's exactly what God is doing here, right? He's rewarding a good guy. And again, as we mentioned, we talked about retributive justice. In other words, if you're good, good things will happen. If you're bad, bad things will happen. Well, the whole book seems to have denied that reality until the last chapter, when it's like, oh yeah, now we restore his good fortunes. And of course, the dead children are dead and they're not getting revived. And so that never gets resolved. Is Job vindicated? I mean, he is vindicated to the extent that he believed in this idea of reward and punishment, which clearly he did. But okay, we're going to look at what some scholars have said about this. Okay, Leo Perdue. With this new verdict, Job's integrity is not only affirmed, but the soiled righteousness of God has been rescued. Indeed, it is the integrity of God, more than Job's, that is rescued by the final judgment. Job's struggle for justice results in the righteousness of God. Job has wrestled with God and won. And as Yahweh had contended earlier, it is justice alone that liberates the world from the oblivion of darkness. Well, in this particular case, yes, Job is vindicated. How many people who are good people are not vindicated, right? So again, after 42 chapters, we still have no real understanding of how God's justice works, right? He suffered for no reason. Now he's getting rewarded. And it's like, what? So here, and we're going to look at Jung in a bit, it talks even more about this, the idea that God's character needs to be vindicated. Because after all, God did some pretty horrible things to Job, or allowed them to happen. And now, oh, God finally does the right thing. How nice. So again, a lot of questions that you can struggle with over this portrait of God, certainly written by human beings, certainly based on experiences that we've all had in our lives. And really, there's no answer except don't try to hang on to dogma, because it won't work. All right, this is J. William Wedby, who wrote the Bible and the Comic Vision. So he says, the poem puts his readers in a privileged position. We know what neither Job nor his counselors know, that Job is afflicted because of a chain of events that occurred in a mysterious divine council, right? That's when the prosecuting angel, Hasatan, came along and said to God, hey, why don't you take everything away from this guy and see what happens? And that's after God is boasting about Job. Whoa, look how much he loves me. Well, is he going to love me even after I take away everything from him? We all know that, but nobody in the story knows that except God and Hasatan, and God never cops to it. This fact throws the whole ensuing dialogue into extreme tension and creates one of the fundamental incongruities of the entire book. The knowledge gained in the prologue shows the major debate to be misplaced and wide of the mark. The happy ending, in my view, demonstrates the ultimate irony and comedy of Job, where the problems are not fully and satisfactorily resolved, where the contradictions and incongruities remain. So, Rhea, you hate the ending, but the ending is in conversation with the rest of the book. And it's so...
Can I
Yes, go ahead.
interject?
Yes.
It's the opposite of that. It is not in incongruity with the book. That the authors of the book wanted us to philosophically discuss and think about what role does an omnipotent God have in the workings of the world, and how do we humans deal with the bad stuff, which happens all the time, and thinking of God as being good. It is not a Greek God. It is totally, this is totally the opposite. No Greek would have asked, why did Zeus come down as a swan and blah, blah, blah. So this is a deep philosophic consideration, and the ending makes it into, these people have made it into a comic, what can I say? And so I don't know what the Mishnah makes of if it asks questions dealing, and the rabbi's discussions, if they go to Job to talk about these issues. And so that would be an interesting thing as well. Anyway, I totally disagree with these. So
By the
as you
way,
know, I
remember,
would.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Remember, I told you that the rabbis try to place Job in the Pharaoh's court as an indifferent and non-intervening presence, so that he deserves what he got, right? But I think, as I also mentioned, I think last time, when Harold Kushner wrote the book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, not why, we can never know unless somehow we end up in heaven with God. You know, we cannot know. We've tried. That is the big question of religion, is why is there evil in the world if God is all good and all just? We have never, ever been able to answer the question, except to the extent that, you know, oh yeah, you can have faith, as Donna mentioned, I think. You can have faith and it's like, God knows what God's doing. We're not going to ask any questions. You know, that's one approach. The other one is to wrestle with this stuff and even to be angry at God at times. Now, remember, so when Harold Kushner wrote his book, what he tried to figure out was, okay, if God is all good and God is all powerful, how is there evil in the world? Or at least evil against innocent people, right? And the way he said, look, you can't have all good and all powerful, because then the world makes no sense. And we don't want to get rid of God as all powerful, because I mean, as all good, because then what's the point of God? So he gets rid of God being all powerful. And that speech in the whirlwind is God kind of keeping these monsters at bay, the behemoth, the land monster, and the Leviathan, the sea monster. So that's what God can do, is to keep them at bay. And sometimes he, she, they is not able to do it enough. And some of that evil seeps in. So that's another way of understanding. I mean, that is in the whirlwind speech. So that can be another way of understanding that God is only limited to this. To, you can't see the rest of my arm.
Yeah.
But
So that's the big question. A limited God, because we look at God as limitless.
and you know what?
And
If you look at the Bible, not so much. God doesn't know everything.
well, it's a question. So this and I love Job for this, because it brings it up out of the surface, out of the what is in the back of our minds,
Right.
and challenges us.
Absolutely.
And when God says, "Look at all I've done," God did the same thing with Jonah, when Jonah complained about the gourd, and God says, "Who are you to complain? Look what I've done." And so humans create this counterbalance, and this argument. We're arguing with ourselves, and so and I like the depressive part of Job. It really fills me with angst, which I love. And so
Good.
I
Yeah.
don't want the end to try to,
The end
get rid
mops
of
up,
that.
yeah, the end mops things up and makes it all tied up with a bow. But
Uh-huh.
given the fact that it's in conversation with the rest of the book and it's in conversation with the rest of the Bible, it should still fill you with angst. Okay, I'm going to go on with a couple more. Okay, Aviva Zornberg is not that easy to understand, so we're going to unpack her. So she's quoting May Hashiloach, known as the Ishbitzer, who is a Hasidic Rebbe, so from the mystical tradition. He's talking about Jacob. Jacob is taught to dwell in peace. Peace obtains when a person behaves in such a way as to keep far from all doubt and guards himself from any evil act. God told him that as long as a human being lives in bodily existence, it is impossible to behave with extreme wariness and fear and humility. God wants human acts, and in this world, human beings must act in love in ways that are not completely clarified. In other words, you can't know. You just can't know. And this is what she's saying here. In this reading, Jacob's desire based on cognitive certainty and moral scrupulousness, fear and humility is what the Ishbitzer calls it. That is, certainty and moral scrupulousness is countered by God's insistence on the tragic nature of existence in this world. What is most needed is not fear, but love, the capacity to act in a world where absolute clarity is not obtainable. So what she's saying is, yeah, we want certainty, right? We want to know, okay, I'm not going to get hit by a car when I walk out into the street today because I've been such a good person. No, I might very well get hit by a car. And I have to live in a world not understanding how all of this works. It's all a big mystery. Now, there are people who've gone through horrible stuff and then they do get rewarded somehow. That does happen. It doesn't happen to everybody, right? And there are people who are horrible who get rewarded with billions of dollars, right? We won't mention who they are. So, we have to live in this world of uncertainty. So what Ishbitzer calls the wariness and fear is having, okay, it's all going to work out so well because I've been such a good person. Or I'll mend my ways and no bad thing will happen to me ever again. No, that's not how it works. We don't have clarity. And we have to still operate out of love. And we still have to go forward. And we still have to, if somebody's suffering, we need to go help them a little bit. Not by yelling at them and telling them they deserve what they're getting, but by just being there for them. Okay. We'll look at a couple more, see which ones you like the best. Now, this one is about this whole dogma business. So this is David Kleins, who's a scholar as well. Says the book proposes to explain Job's suffering by God's need to know whether gratuitous piety is possible. In other words, what God's trying to figure out is, if I didn't give this guy all this stuff, would he still love me? We can all look at our own lives. I've spoiled my kid. What if I stop spoiling my kid? Would the kid not love me anymore? Or a partner. I've showered my partner with all these gifts and all that. Well, what if I stop? Or however you can, twist that. So God is trying to answer this question. Does somebody love me for who I am? And as he said, the problem is that it's impossible to see Job's case as paradigmatic of human suffering. In other words, no other person is suffering for this reason. At least that seems to be the premise here. Now, maybe God is toying with some of us as I'm speaking, right? To see if we can love God for no reason, even though we've suffered. But the book is only explaining one guy's suffering. Once the question is resolved to God's satisfaction, he does not need to experiment again to find that out. Oh, I found out there's somebody who loved me no matter what. I don't need to test anyone else. Since Job's case involves a specific wager between God and Hasatan, once resolved, it answers only that question. The instant we recognize that this reason is unique to Job, at that moment we are in the dark again about the meaning of human suffering generally. And we're in the dark again about the human suffering generally. Why is this doing this? Okay, sorry, got to go back. Why, see, we have a lot more to go, so I have to go quickly. So we know why Job suffered. That doesn't tell us anything about why we're suffering. And we know there's this little happy ending. Is that realistic? It's kind of annoying because, like, here you get everything back, but your 7 kids are still dead. And as I said, nobody seems to worry about Mrs. Job. So this is why the book is so complicated and why you keep thinking you might know the answer and then you keep realizing you don't. Okay, Edwin Good says, they consoled and comforted him about all the evil that Yahweh had brought upon him. The closing tale lays the responsibility for Job's suffering squarely on God. I know that offends people, And it shows that the solution to it is provided by Job's brothers, sisters, and acquaintances. The three friends had no solution. Comfort about the meaning of suffering is not found in debates and truths about theology or theory of the matter, nor in divine descriptions of the working of the cosmos. Comfort comes to Job in the presence of family and friends who acknowledge the source of the trouble and console the sufferer by their presence. So let me unpack this for a minute. When I think it was my first week of being a rabbi over 21 years ago. And a woman came to speak to me about her daughter, who I think she was on the spectrum, something. And she said to me, why is this happening to me? And here I am, fresh out of seminary. So I try to give her some theological explanations. That's not what she needed. I realized that pretty quickly. What she needed was me to hear her. People need to be heard. In fact, when I did a chaplaincy program at UCLA, I learned from my wonderful, wonderful supervisor that the most important thing is to just be there with people and to hear them and to let them feel heard and seen and for their pain to have a witness. It's not about, let me theologically explain this to you. That could come later, but it certainly is not what people need in the immediate. So these friends came and tried to say, look, this is our theology. This is how things work. This is why you're suffering. And that's not what's going to give him any kind of comfort. The comfort is they come and they're there with him. And that's, to me, the answer to the question, the wrong question I asked. As I said, I asked, why does bad stuff happen, being a Holocaust survivor's daughter? And there's no answer. There is no answer. The only answer is, what do I do when it happens to someone? Okay, we've got a couple more scholars here. So Ilana Pardes, who's a feminist scholar, says, the exchange between Job and his wife and later between Job and his friends, regardless of how hostile these dialogues tend to be, marked the beginning of Job's growing interest in human relations. Okay, this is interesting. The book of Job thus makes clear that an intense dialogue with God does not preclude other dialogues. On the contrary, it enhances an openness to other modes of intimacy and is in turn enriched by them. Once Job is able to let go of his insistence on a rigid view of God's relationship to humankind, he discovers a far more intricate mode of faith, a faith which relies on an ongoing quest. Now, there's another page to this, but let's just look at this. So Job was pretty much acting and behaving as though God was sort of a mechanical deity. You do a good deed, you get rewarded. You do a bad deed, you get punished. That's very mechanical, and in fact, kind of takes away God's freedom. If God has to follow the rules like that, that's pretty rigid. And Job was operating out of this fear of offending God in any way, whether it was fear of offending God himself or fear of his children offending God merely by having thoughts. So he was, and then he says, look, I did nothing wrong. I demand justice. Well, guess what? That's not how the world works, except for the epilogue, which sort of tricks you into thinking you figured it out and then makes you think, no, we didn't. But the point is, once he has this dialogue with God and he's not offering sacrifices to God and he's not praising God, he is having a dialogue with God. That opens him up into a very different kind of relationship with God, which also then is reflected in his relationship with other people, because he is questioning God and it's a much more authentic relationship. Okay, let's look at the second part. Job's relation to women undergoes a significant change. The man who rebuked and silenced his wife, remember when she says, curse God and die, he basically says, be quiet, woman. I mean, not in those exact words, but it's like, what do you know? And she was pushing him to say, wait a minute, don't just take it lying down, which he did in the prologue. Come on, be a man, you know? So, and then he was angry at the female body that gave birth to him, right? Those are his relationships to women. But now he has 3 daughters and he names them. And this is the only place in the Bible where a father names his daughters. And he names them these beautiful names, like possibly dove or bright day, a type of perfume, or cinnamon, a black powder or a blue powder. I mean, no one's exactly sure what these words mean. They speak of a new world. Job has discovered a world of beauty, of fragrance, of cosmetics, of feminine grace. Job expresses his respect for his daughters, and he also provides them with property, not just, gee, I recognize that the feminine evokes a lot of things that I had been cutting myself off from, like the
Suzanne,
sensuality of the world. Yeah.
why do you say that this is the only place where daughters are named? I mean, like, Benot Zalafchad, or, there are other
Where a father names the daughter, not
where it actually says the father
Yeah.
named the daughter. Okay.
Yeah. And this is Ilana Pardais saying it, not me, but yeah. There are women who are named, and the daughters of Zelophehad, who are the 5 women who challenge the law that land goes only to men, and they get the law changed as a result of their challenge. And their names are repeated several times in the Bible, but this one is the only time apparently where a father actually names his daughters.
Okay.
So he's awakening to this other, much more complicated, complex world, and to the sort of beauty of the world and the sensuality, all the stuff that he sort of had cut off from himself. So I think he really goes through an incredible transformation, which we all know. If you go through tragedy, it changes you, hopefully for the better. Hopefully you grow out of it into something more complex as opposed to getting bitter. All right, we're going to look at a couple more things. We don't have a lot of time. We'll skip the questions for now. So Jung, the psychologist, says that they all call God Yahweh when they're doing it in a scholarly way. Quite without reason, had let himself be influenced of one of his sons by a doubting thought and made unsure of Job's faithfulness. With this touchiness and suspiciousness, the mere possibility of doubt was enough to infuriate him and induce that peculiar double-faced behavior of which he had already given proof in the Garden of Eden, when he pointed out the tree to the first parents, and at the same time forbade them to eat it. See, God seems to be playing tricks, not just with Job, but if you say to 2 people, see this huge forest, you can eat from any of these trees except this very one I'm pointing out to you. What happens when you tell a kid, you can have all of this except for this? They're going to pick that, right? So here, God is not portrayed in such a positive way. Similarly, his faithful servant Job is now to be exposed to a rigorous moral test, quite gratuitously and to no purpose, although God is convinced of Job's faithfulness and constancy, and could moreover have assured himself beyond all doubt on this point had he taken counsel with his own omniscience. In other words, if God is omniscient, knows everything, why did God have to test a poor guy? He could have just said, I know this. But from the human point of view, Yahweh's behavior is so revolting that one has to ask oneself whether there's not a deeper motive hidden behind it. What does man possess that God does not have? Could a suspicion have grown up in God that man possesses an infinitely small yet more concentrated light than he, Yahweh, possesses? And again, I apologize for the masculine language, but that's how Jung wrote it. Shrewdly, Job takes up Yahweh's aggressive words and prostrates himself at his feet as if he were indeed the defeated antagonist. Remember, Job says, I'll shut up and sit in dust and ashes.
Are we supposed to be seeing the text right now?
Oh, you don't see it? Does no one else see it?
We see it.
I see it.
Okay, are you on a phone or something? Because maybe you need to swipe or something.
Never mind then. Something happened. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Shrewdly, Job takes up Yahweh's aggressive words and prostrates himself at his feet as if he were indeed the defeated antagonist. Guileless as Job's speech sounds, it could just as well be equivocal. He's learned his lesson well. Formerly, he was naive, dreaming perhaps of a good God, or of a benevolent ruler and just judge, that God would be faithful and true, or at least just. But to his horror, he discovers that Yahweh is in certain respects less than human. All right, one more slide of Jung. Yahweh's behavior is the behavior of an unconscious being who cannot be judged morally. One can submit to such a God only with fear and trembling. and can try indirectly to propitiate the despot with unctuous praises and ostentatious obedience. In other words, God is such a revolting figure here, and the only thing we can do is try to make him, okay, listen, we'll give you some sacrifices, we'll pray to you, and maybe you'll tone your craziness down. But a relationship of trust seems completely out of the question to our modern way of thinking, nor can moral satisfaction be expected from an unconscious nature God of this kind. Like, God doesn't seem to understand what God is even doing, right? The victory of the vanquished and oppressed is obvious. Job stands morally higher than Yahweh. In this respect, the creature has surpassed the creator. So I'm going to just tell you, I didn't put this in here in my slides because this is a Jewish class, but Jung concludes that because human beings in this story are at a higher plane than God, that God needs to learn something from human beings. And guess how God does that? By incarnating as Jesus. Okay, I didn't include that in my slides because, I'm not a Jesus follower, but interesting that his whole point is that God needs to learn something from us because God is clearly morally deficient. Like that, Rhea? There's something really wrong in this picture of God. Again, remember, this is written by people who are trying to understand their lives. It's not written by God. God probably sitting there going, you people have no clue. So Monty Krieger said he didn't see the text. Okay, I think everyone else saw it, right? So Monty's having a problem. Okay, now I'm going to throw out one more thing, which is Leslie Fiedler. I'd like to recommend a book. It's called Congregation. And it's a book about different passages in the Bible written by non-biblical scholars. So this is Leslie Fiedler writing about Job. He was an English professor. And he says that every time you come to this book, you come to it with a different life experience, right? You're older, you're younger, you're whatever, and you learn new things every time you read it. Okay, I just had an insight a couple of days ago about this book, and I studied it for a long time, and I've taught it a lot. Here's the final clue to the meaning of the mystery of the wager with the adversary, that's Hasatan, to whom we were first introduced standing at ease with his fellow B'nai Elohim, meaning all the angels. This is God's court with the angels. It's with himself that God is betting, with his own other side, from which he cannot otherwise exercise a suspicion that no man, not even Job, his perfect servant, does good for nothing. This is what God's quest is in this story. It is this nagging doubt which entices him into making the cruel test whose outcome we tell ourselves, he surely knows from the start. Again, if God is omniscient, why does God have to even do this? But then, like him perhaps, we remember how Adam, similarly tempted, fell. Certainly ever since that mythological event, which is to say, since mankind first knew good from evil, we've been haunted by doubts about our own virtue, which we project in fear and trembling upon our Maker. So this is important. This is how we are projecting onto God what we ourselves are struggling with, right? So we want to know, are we tempted to do things that aren't so good? Adam got tempted, Eve got tempted. I don't know why he doesn't mention Eve in here. We're tempted too. And we don't always believe that we're good people. So let's project that onto God and see how that one works out for us. And then maybe we desperately needed a happy ending because there is no happy ending to many lives, right? After all, Job is a work written by man and not by God. It should read, so it seems to me, as a revelation, psychological rather than theological, that we want to be thus tempted by God, want the doubt about ourselves, which we attribute to him, to be resolved in our favor. This is not so much about why there's evil in the world, but it's more about the self-doubt that we have about our own worth. And so let's see what God does with something like that, right? Only after this, in the wish dream, which constitutes the true heart of Job, comes a long-awaited happy ending. At this point, however, we pass from the mystery of evil to the even greater mystery of restoration, which I must confess I have as yet barely begun to understand. So, Rhea, he's kind of in your shoes. It's like, huh? wait, we went through all these chapters and now this is how it ends? This is too weird. I suspect indeed that I never shall, unless like Job, but God forbid that I pay the price, I'm granted a double 80 years and 10 in addition to those I've already lived. Until then, therefore, I am moved like him to lay my hand upon my mouth and to repeat his penultimate vow of silence, which finally, to be sure, he did not keep. Once I have spoken, yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. So he's saying that this really is about us. It's about our trying to understand who we are as human beings. And how it all ends up perfectly sewn up at the end, maybe we'll understand in 50 years or so. So, oh, okay. Rabbi Tilshin put a whole bunch of stuff in the chat for you to take a look at for further series. And if you'd like to make a donation, that would be very, very appreciated. So I'll just say, you know, the fact that you might get angry at part of Job is really great, because we're struggling with all of these questions. Are we good enough? Do we deserve to even be here? Are we doing enough to make the world a better place? And God, how you understand God, is that a big mystery whose justice is way beyond our comprehension? How do we struggle with that? How do we accept it? Again, we just went through Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, where one of the prayers is Unatana Tokef, who shall die and who shall live, who by fire, who by water. It's a very disturbing prayer. And it's particularly disturbing if you read what introduces it, which says God is the shepherd, our shepherd. Like, which ones of you are going to slaughter and which ones of you are going to be kept behind and which one is going to be a pet for somebody. God is making those decisions according to the prayer, although it's also possible to understand it as not connected to God's decisions. But anyway, so these are things we've just been grappling with, including our worth. Like, we are asking for forgiveness so we can be better people. So I hope that, you know, these 4 sessions and some of these scholars who have presented their points of view will give you a lot of food for thought. You will have access to the recording and all the slides if you go on the Jewish Collaborative website. So thank
And
you.
they'll be there in perpetuity. And also, Suzanne, I just want to say thank you for the wonderful book recommendations you've made to all of us. I mean, really, I'm excited to dig into some of those as someone who loves the Bible so much. And we'll leave the room open, but it was just wonderful to meet you all. This was a fabulous class. Suzanne's a consummate teacher, as you can all see, and she'll be back. She and I are already talking about her next series, hopefully, you know, in the early part of 2025. So I hope we'll all be able to see each other again. Thank you so much. For those of you celebrating the holiday of Sukkot, Chag Sameach, and may the, I don't know how to say this, but I really do believe this. May the winds of goodness and truth and integrity lift us through what looks like it's going to be a very difficult few months. And we'll have lots to talk about. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I'm going to stop recording. Here we go. Yes.